Okay, we'll start now. In this class, what we are going to do is we will take up the second section, that is section B of paper 2 of 2025 exam, that is philosophy of religion section. In earlier classes, we have analyzed in details the question paper of 2025 exam, and also we have discussed other sections, that is paper 1, both sections, Indian philosophy, Western philosophy, and paper 2, socio-political philosophy, uh, and tried to arrive at model answers. So today we are going to do the same for uh, philosophy of religion section. As I have earlier told, this year's questions were little more tricky, more comparative in nature, more critical, uh, more evaluative, actually, we can say. So, and the trend is actually since last 3 4 years continuously in that direction. So, next year's paper also we can expect on the same lines, or even one a little more enhanced in those parameters. So, that's what my understanding is. So, now we will try to discuss the uh, philosophy of religion section of this year's question paper. Let us see how the questions were and what can be the model answer for that. We'll start one by one. As you know, in section B, we have questions from 5th to 8th of the second paper. Fifth question has 5 parts, A, B, C, D, E. Other questions have 3 parts, A, B, C. In this fifth question, each part will be answered in about 150 words, and for 10 marks. Similarly, 6th, 7th, 8th questions, 20 marks, 15 marks, 15 marks. These 3 parts will be there. And accordingly, the answers will be there in those number of words. So now let us try to discuss. We will start one by one. So discuss fifth question. So now fifth question, part A, if you see, the first question itself was discuss Charvak's critique of belief in the existence of suprasensible entities. Now, in a way, this question is not that tricky. That's quite easy. But what is a distinguishing feature is the part of Indian philosophy they have brought in, or they have linked with philosophy of religion. So to that extent, one should have practice and ability to do that, because whatever you read in Western philosophy or Indian philosophy, uh, maybe that part of that you will have to utilize, or you have to answer, or you have to base your answer on those parts. So similarly, this, because Charvak almost everybody studies, and one of the easiest chapters in Indian philosophy, but then that has to be used here in philosophy of religion section. Now the directive, if you see, directive is discuss, which means you have to give the exposition, and also you have to critically evaluate that briefly, because 150 words do not permit to go in great details, because number of words are quite less. But then briefly you have to also critically evaluate the exposition, and then finally you have to conclude the answer. Uh, and what is the exposition? Charvak's critique of belief in existence of suprasensible entities. So this is basically the exposition you have to give. Then you have to critically evaluate that briefly, and then you have to give conclusion. So now let us try to start. And then, in my previous classes, I have already told number of references, the text which you are quoting, and particularly in Indian philosophy, if you are going the terms from the Sanskrit, or uh, Western philosophy, if you are going terms from uh, Greek, Latin, etc., needs to be quoted to the extent you can remember, because definitely 100% you will not be able to remember, but whatever. So now let us start. So the answer, model answer can be like this. The Charvak or Lokayat school, representing Indian materialism, rejected all belief in suprasensible entities such as God, soul, karma, heaven, liberation, etc. So these are suprasensible entities. Now, first sentence, we are almost elaborating this. And then subsequently, we will try to explain this. Their critique rested on epistemology, that is, only perception was accepted as valid source of knowledge, while inference and testimony were dismissed when they claimed realities beyond sense experience. Since such entities are imperceptible, they were considered baseless. Even consciousness was explained materially. This is for Charvak. Even consciousness was explained materially, just as intoxication arising out of liquor. So this is how Charvak has criticized suprasensible entities and not believed basically in that. Now, critically, this radical empiricism encouraged skepticism but was internally inconsistent. As daily life itself requires inference, for example, smoke, fire, example, most of you may be knowing, which who have already studied. The Nyaya school faulted them for undermining logic and science. So this is critique from Nyaya school. Then Shankara argued that without suprasensible, ethical and spiritual life collapses. This is critique from Shankaracharya. Modern critics like Karl Popper noted that knowledge grows through hypothesis and falsification, not perception alone. Thus, Charvak's critique was pioneering in challenging metaphysics, but ultimately too reductionist to provide a complete philosophy of knowledge and life. So, Charvak lacked in that sense. However, his critique definitely was a challenge to other schools of Indian philosophy to think about their, particularly the metaphysics, and make them quite consistent. I will go to part B. Is religious language symbolic? Give reasons and justification in support of your answer. So basically, the directive is you have to explain, or you have to first answer basically whether religious language is symbolic. You may say yes, you may say no, but then accordingly you have to give reasons and justification in support of your answer. And then while giving reasons and justifications, definitely you will have to cover a few negative points also. So that also automatically is included in the directive. So let us try to understand what can be the answer. Religious language attempts to express realities beyond ordinary experience. For example, God, eternity, salvation, etc., which cannot be conveyed through literal descriptions. Many philosophers therefore argue it is symbolic. Paul Tillich claimed that symbols participate in the reality they signify, disclosing levels of meaning inaccessible to literal speech. Another philosopher, Rudolf Otto, likewise described concepts such as holy or luminous as symbolic expressions of an ineffable encounter with divine. Similarly, myths, parables, and rituals work symbolically, shaping moral vision and spiritual life. So, this is one interpretation which says that religious language is symbolic. We have quoted two philosophers, and what is the meaning of that? Now, other interpretations, however, exist. There are other interpretations also. For example, Thomas Aquinas proposed that religious language is analogical, genuinely referring to divine attributes, though not univocally. Similarly, Wittgenstein, in his later philosophy, treated religious discourse as a distinct language game, meaningful within its own form of life rather than merely symbolic. So, this is another view. So, now what can be the conclusion? Because now there is no clear answer that religious language is symbolic. There are symbolic views, I mean, the views expressed by philosophers that religious language is symbolic. There are other side of the views also. So the conclusion can be, thus, while approaches differ, the symbolic interpretation best explains how religious language conveys transcendent meaning, inspiring faith and ethical orientation beyond literal speech. So, what we have tried to conclude is that even though approaches may differ, the symbolic interpretation perhaps is the best explanation of religious language, because other explanations perhaps have more negative points compared to symbolic language. So this is the conclusion and the answer of the question. Now we'll go to third part, that is part C. Present an account of Nietzsche's criticism of religion and morality. So this again, if you remember, I mean, Nietzsche you may be studying in Western philosophy. So here again the question from Western philosophy, question from Indian philosophy, question from Western philosophy, particularly the philosophers who are little some way related to religion and I mean philosophy of religion have been taken from that. So here similar question, present an account of Nietzsche's criticism of religion and morality, and the directive is presenting an account, so which again uh, includes evaluation of Nietzsche's criticism and also some concluding remarks also you have to say. So now let us try to understand. Nietzsche launched a radical critique of Western religion and morality, especially Christianity, because he dealt Christianity in quite detail in his writings. Proclaiming the death of God, he argued that belief in God was a human projection, suppressing vitality and freedom. Christianity, he claimed, produced a slave morality. So this is what Nietzsche's view. Humility, pity, and obedience. These are the qualities of slave morality, he said, arising from uh, resentment of weak against the strong. Resentiment of weak against the strong. Such morality in inverted natural instincts, glorified weakness, and condemned strength and creativity. So this is what slave morality and death of God. These are the main proclamations of Nietzsche, you can say, or criticism of religion and morality. Priests, he held, deepened this distortion by spreading guilt and illusions of sin, because this is what he said the priests are doing. Salvation and an afterlife. This is also priest's story. In contrast, Nietzsche upheld master morality. So this is what Nietzsche advocated against the slave morality of Christianity or of Christian religion, affirming vitality and the will to power, culminating in Obermensch and re-evaluation of all values. So this is what Nietzsche has told as far as the criticism is concerned. Now let us try to briefly critically evaluate Nietzsche's view. Critically, Nietzsche unmasked the psychological origins of moral ideas and inspired existentialism, because he was one of the important philosophers of existentialism. Yet his dismissal of compassion appears elitist. Jean-Paul Sartre retained his stress on freedom but added responsibility, while McIntyre, another philosopher, argued that Nietzsche exposed modern morality's incoherence but provided no coherent alternative. So, even though philosophers agree that yes, there is some incoherence in modern religion or morality, but Nietzsche's alternative which he has given is also not fully perfect. Thus, Nietzsche's critique is powerful in demolition but inadequate in construction. So now you see this is the important concluding line which sums up basically the whole expression in 3-4 paragraphs what has been written earlier. I will go to fifth D. Discuss the nature of embodied liberation, that is Jivan Mukti, with reference to Advait Vedanta. Now again, this question comes from Indian philosophy, from Advait Vedanta chapter. So here the directive is discuss the nature of Jivan Mukti. So again, discuss means you have to explain and you have to also briefly critically evaluate also this idea of Jivan Mukti with reference to Advait Vedanta. In Advait Vedanta, liberation is not only post-mortem, but can be realized during embodied existence as Jivan Mukti also. So this is Sankara's view. According to Sankara, bondage arises from avidya, that is ignorance, which creates the illusion of individuality. Through Atmagyan, the seeker realizes the non-duality of Atma and Brahma, destroying ignorance while the body continues to function. The Jivan Mukti is inwardly free from desire, fear, and attachment. So this is quality of Jivan Mukt. Though bodily life persists due to prarabdha karma, the realized self remains unaffected. like a lotus leaf untouched by water. Shankara compares this state to an arrow already released. The body must run its course, but the self is liberated. So basically, liberation in lifetime, liberation in one's own lifetime itself is called Jivan Mukti, and this is what the concept of Jivan Mukti as far as Advaita Vedanta is concerned. Now, briefly, criticism of this. Critically, Nyaya school questioned the very possibility of liberation in the body, since embodiment entails pain. So this is what Nyaya philosophers say. In contrast, Radha Krishnan, one of the modern philosophers, modern Indian philosophers, interpreted Jivan Mukti as spiritual integrated with ethical action in the world. So this is the interpretation of Radha Krishnan of Sankara Vedanta and accordingly of Jivan Mukti. Thus, Advaita affirms Jivan Mukti as inner freedom here and now. So this is what basically the views of Radha Krishnan have been uh, mentioned in the conclusion. Advaita Vedanta affirms Jivan Mukti as inner freedom here and now. Now, last part of the question, fifth, how does Aquinas' account of faith as an intellectual assent reconcile the juxtaposition between reason and faith? So, reason and faith, two important pillars of religion. And the directive of this question is, how does Aquinas' account of faith as an intellectual assent reconcile the juxtaposition between reason and faith? So basically, this intellectual assent, how it's reconciling between reason and faith, this we have to explain. So, we have to talk regarding both sides of the argument and then finally try to conclude also. So now let us start. In Summa Theologica, Thomas Aquinas has defined faith as an intellectual assent to truths revealed by God. Faith is an act of the intellect moved by the will under grace. Unlike opinion, it carries certainty. Unlike knowledge, its content, Trinity, incarnation, salvation, etc. These are the religious beliefs, lies beyond rational proof. Aquinas reconciles reason and faith by giving them complementary domains. Reason, drawing on Aristotelian philosophy, can prove God's existence. That is 5 ways. He has given 5 ways to prove the God and safeguard against error. While faith apprehends revealed mysteries inaccessible to reason, yet not contrary to it. Faith thus perfects reason by directing it toward ultimate truth, while reason grounds faith in rational inquiry. So basically, in Aquinas' word, reason and faith are basically two sides of the same coin in a way, you can say. Now, what is the critical evaluation of this view? Critically, Kant reduced faith to moral postulates. Kierkegaard, another philosopher, saw it as a passionate leap beyond reason. And modern critics like Karl Barth insisted that revelation transcends rational assent. Yet Aquinas' synthesis remains enduring, portraying faith as a supra-rational openness to mystery, a harmony of intellect and revelation rather than a conflict. So basically, in Aquinas' word, as I told, he viewed faith and reason as both sides of the same coin, and in his view, both together contribute to intellectual assent of many religious beliefs, etc. Otherwise, perhaps it's not possible. So that was his view. Now we'll go to question 6. Question 6, as you know, has 3 parts, part A, part B, part C. Part A is 20 marks question, and usually 20 marks question we try to answer in about 300 words, maybe 10, 20, 10%, this side, that side. So now the question is, present an account of design argument to prove the existence of God along with its criticism by David Hume. So now the question, as you see, has 2 parts. First, an account of design argument has to be given. Second, a criticism of David Hume particularly has to be given, because there may be some other criticism also, design argument, but criticism of Hume particularly have to be mentioned. And then finally some critical evaluation, etc. also has to be told, and then conclusion. So now let us start. The design argument or teleological argument, because both are same, design argument is also called teleological argument, infers God's existence from order and purpose in the universe. So this is the main basis of this argument. It maintains that complexity and adaptation cannot be explained by chance but require intelligence. Just as a watch employs watchmaker, so too cosmos employs a divine designer. So this is the argument basically. The idea was developed by Thomas Aquinas. In his fifth way, non-rational natural entities act toward ends. Since they lack consciousness, they must be directed by an intelligent being, that is God. This is Thomas Aquinas' argument in his fifth way. Centuries later, another philosopher, William Paley, in Natural Theology, his book Natural Theology, offered the classic watchmaker analogy. So Paley's watchmaker analogy is very famous. I mean, you might have already read if you have read the proofs for existence of God. A watch's integrate mechanism requires a maker. Likewise, the eye ecosystems and planetary system imply a supreme designer. So this is what the argument is. The argument rests on analogy between human artifacts and natural order, inferring divine intelligence. So this is the argument. Now let us try to understand what is the Hume's criticism. David Hume, in his book Dialogues Concerning Natural Reason, subjected this reasoning to severe criticism. First, now he has given a number of criticisms, so we'll try to enumerate, and this you can do by bullet points also, by numbering also. So here we have done in small paragraphs, first, second, third, fourth, and fifth, like that. So first, the analogy is weak. What Hume told, that analogy is weak. The universe is not sufficiently like a machine. Second, alternative explanations such as chance, eternal matter, or natural laws may suffice, because the Darwin's evolution theory also is related. So that's what Hume argument. Third, problem of evil suggests an imperfect designer, and God cannot be imperfect. So this also is a criticism. Fourth, the analogy could imply a plurality of designers, not one infinite God. So maybe there are a number of designers, not one God. Finally, the inference is limited. Even if design exists, it does not prove the all-powerful and benevolent deity of theism. So this is again argument of Hume. Now Hume's critique was later reinforced by Charles Darwin, as I told, whose theory of evolution explained biological adaptation without invoking divine design. So this is the criticism of the design argument. Yet modern defenders, now there have been some modern supporters also in the thinking and thinkers and philosophers. So one such thinker is Richard Swinburne, reformulate the argument probabilistically, while cosmologists appeal to the fine tuning of, and then finally concludes. Definitely it has to be done. Now the process theodicy derived from Alfred North Whitehead, he is the main exponent, and systematized by Charles Hartshorne, redefines God to address the problem of evil. It rejects the classical view of divine omnipotence and immutability. God is conceived as a dynamic and relational, exercising persuasive rather than coercive power. So basically, this view says that God is not all powerful, God is not omnipotent, and therefore he cannot control the evil. Now, what are its main tenets? First, reality as a process. The universe is in constant becoming. Even God participates in this unfolding. Second, freedom and evil. Genuine creaturely autonomy is necessary, and evil arises as its inevitable byproduct. Third, God as a co-sufferer. God experiences the world's pain, sharing in suffering rather than standing aloof. Fourth, creative advance. God integrates evil into the onward movement of creation, drawing it toward richer harmony and value. So basically, now you see these main tenets, what they point to, that God is obviously not all powerful, not omnipotent, but then this kind of God is not going to appeal to any religion basically, because if God is not powerful, all powerful, omnipotent, omniscient, omnibenevolent, then he is not a God of religion. So this is what has happened, and we'll see in the criticism of this view. Same thing has been expressed by many philosophers. Evaluation. Process theodicy is praised for offering a pastoral vision of compassionate God who suffers with creation, a feature absent in classical theism. So this is absent in classical theism. Yet, it risks weakening divine sovereignty by denying omnipotence. John Hick, one of the philosophers, important philosophers, questioned whether such a God can sustain faith. Similarly, Elvin Pettinga held that the free will defense preserves omnipotence. He says that free will defense is better than process theodicy, Elvin Pettinga's view. Then Karl Barth, another philosopher, and traditional theologians rejected limiting omnipotence, seeing it as an incompatible with biblical theism, and also theism from and basically other religions, many other religions also. Thus, process theodicy shifts theodicy from explanation to participation. This is what it has done, making suffering meaningful in divine empathy, but at the cost of redefining God beyond recognition. So, God of process theodicy is not God, same God of any theist would like to believe in. So, its God becomes something which is beyond any recognition. So, this is what they have done. Now, we'll go to C part of the sixth question. Distinguish between natural theology and revealed theology. So, natural theology and revealed theology in the context of propositional view of revelation. So, now this question, we have to distinguish between natural theology and revealed theology, but in context of propositional view of revelation. So, this is what has to be done. And after distinguishing, we'll try to briefly, we'll try to conclude also. And if a number of words permit, we'll try to evaluate also. Now, propositional view of revelation conceives divine disclosures as a set of truth claims or doctrines communicated by God and received by the intellect. Within this framework, theology is pursued in two distinct modes, that is, natural and revealed theology. So, both natural and revealed theology are modes of propositional view of revelation. Natural theology, what is natural theology? Relies on reason and observation of creation. Aristotle's unmoved mover and Cicero's argument from order anticipated it, while another philosopher, Thomas Aquinas, in 5 ways inferred propositions such as God exists as a first cause. Later, John Locke upheld reason's ability to establish divine truths. Revelation here is indirect, mediated through nature, and accessible to all rational beings. So, this is natural theology. Now, what is revealed theology? Another part of this propositional disclosure. Revealed theology, by contrast, depends on special divine communication through scriptures, prophets, and Christ. It conveys truths beyond natural reason, such as Trinity or salvation. St. Augustine expressed this as credo ut intelligam, while Karl Barth, another philosopher, insisted revelation alone grounds authentic theology. So now let us try to critically mention the plus positive points and negative points of these two versions. Critically, natural theology is valued for preparing the ground for faith, while revealed theology completes it with salvific truth. Richard Swinburne, one of the philosophers, and John Paul II defend their complementarity. So they say that both are complementary, whereas Elvin Piltinga doubts natural theology's certainty and Barth rejects it outrightly. So some philosophers say that both are complementary. Some philosophers reject natural theology altogether. Non-propositional views also challenge revelation as a doctrine. So natural theology begins with human reason, revealed theology with God's word. Together, they express the tension and complementarity of reason's reach and revelation's gift within propositional truth. So, within propositional view, both are in a way, we can say, complementary, because natural theology begins with human reason, and revealed theology with God's words, God's discourses, and together they, in a complementary way, they explain regions reach and revelation skipped with propositional truth. Now we'll go to question 7. how does Vedantic view of religious pluralism addresses the conflicting truth claim of different faiths? Answer with reference to Swami Vivekananda's views of universal religion. Now, you see, there are two parts in the question. First is, how does Vedantic view of religious pluralism addresses the conflicting truth claims of different faiths? So this is first part. But then this first part, after briefly describing Vedantic view, uh, this answer has to be broadly with reference to Swami Vivekananda's view of universal religion. So this has to be done. So therefore, uh, first Vedantic view, then Swami Vivekananda's view, and then how religious pluralism addresses the conflicting truth claims of different faiths. This has to be explained. Now let us try to understand. Religious pluralism arises from conflicting truth claims. For example, Christianity's salvation in Christ, Islam's submission to Allah, Buddhism's nirvana, Hinduism's moksha, etc. So these are different conflicting claims of various religions, if you can say. Now, what Advaita Vedanta says? Advaita Vedanta grounded in Upanishadic dictum, Ekam Sat Vipraha Baudha Vadanti. So this is a Sanskrit phrase from Upanishad. Truth is one, sages call it by many names, reconciles these tensions by affirming that all religions are valid yet partial expressions of the same Brahma. So this is what Advaita Vedanta says. For Shankara, doctrinal differences are upayas, that is aids converging at experiential realization of non-duality. So basically, this is the explanation from Shankaracharya, and this reconciles in a way different conflicting claims of various religions. Now, Swami Vivekananda, what he did, Swami Vivekananda transformed this Vedantic inclusivism into idea of universal religion, articulated at 1893 Parliament of Religions in Chicago. He asserted that no faith monopolizes truth. All are paths to the same summit. Universal religion was not a new creed but a spiritual synthesis, honoring ritual and doctrinal diversity while affirming inner unity, the realization of the divine within. This vision anticipated modern thought also, pluralism thoughts also, including John Hicks' pluralistic hypothesis, and resonates with India's model of constitutional secularism that respects all faiths equally. So this is basically now exposition, particularly in view of the Vivekananda's universal religion, that how Advaita Vedanta view reconciles different conflicting claims of different faiths. But now let us go to critical evaluation. While profound in this approach faces limits, critics note that the risk of homogenization, which this view tries to do, reducing distinct doctrines into Vedantic molds. Similarly, exclusivist traditions may resist being subsumed under a larger synthesis. Elvin Piltinga, and one of the important philosophers, argued that natural theology cannot yield certainty. Another philosopher, Karl Barth, rejected pluralism, insisting revelation is unique to Christ. Another philosopher, important Indian philosopher, Aurobindo, nuanced Vivekananda, seeing religions as distinct stages of evolving consciousness, not merely partial views. Moreover, contemporary scholars warn that reducing all paths to different roads to same summit neglects deeper divergence in ethics, metaphysics, and salvation. So this is the critical view of what Vivekananda says, what Advaita Vedanta view says. And let us now try to conclude. If exclusivism asserts one truth and relativism denies shared truth, Vedanta through Vivekananda affirms many paths leading to one summit. This unity in diversity remains a philosophically robust and practically relevant response to religious pluralism. It is, but then it is also not universally accepted by all the thinkers, philosophers, and that we have seen our criticism. Now we'll go to part B of 7th question. What proofs do Nyaya philosophers offer for the existence of God? Discuss. So basically, you have to list out the proofs of the Nyaya philosophers for existence of God. And then discuss means, again, you have to critically evaluate briefly and then conclude. Now, as I told earlier also, many questions you have seen that they are taken from the Western philosophy, they are taken from Indian philosophy, and then they have tried to link it with philosophy of religion, and then accordingly it has been asked. So this question is also like that. Nyaya school defends theism through logical inference, most systematically in Udayan's Nyaya Kusumanjali. It is one of the important, Udayan was one of the important Nyaya philosopher, and he has written Nyaya Kusumanjali, which presents 9 proofs for God. So now you have to list out all the 9 proofs, because the question says like that: what proofs do Nyaya philosophers offer to the existence of God? So 9 proofs have to be listed. So accordingly, 1, 2, 3. Now you can list because there are 9. So definitely numbering is required here. Headings are also required. Now Sanskrit terms have been used, original Sanskrit terms which they have used. So first is karyat, then ayojanat, then Tritdeha, then Padat, then Pratyayat, then Srute. I'm not going reading this because this is easy, but I mean this, then Vyakt, then Sankhya Vishisht, then Adrast. So these are 9 proofs which they have given. Now, what these proofs say, now let us briefly try to understand, and then only we'll be able to critically evaluate it. The word like a pot requires an intelligent cause. So this is just like a cosmological argument. So Aquinas cosmological argument. So wherever comparative things you can quote, you need to quote, because that will enhance the quality of your answer. Then second is atoms cannot purposively combine without an intelligent arranger. So this is also a part of basically cosmological argument. Then cosmic order and regularity imply a sustainer. Then the word meaning relation presupposes an original instructor. Then the authority of the Vedas requires an omniscient author. Then Vedic testimony itself affirms God. Then prescriptive commands imply a divine lawgiver. Then the infinity of numbers points to an eternal knower. Then the just dispensation of karmic results presupposes a moral governor. So these are the 9 proofs which they have given. Now let us try to critically evaluate this. Now Buddhists, for example, Nagarjuna and Dharmakirti, they are Buddhist philosophers, rejected a creator attributing order to dependent origination. So they straightway rejected. Then Mimamsaks, Kumaril Bhatt and Prabhakar Mishra, saw the Veda as eternal and authorless. Similarly, Charvaks denied inference of an unseen deity. Modern science questions analogies like Potter pot, though Nyaya's karma-based moral argument parallels Kant moral proof. Later, Nabbe Nyaya philosophers like Gangesh further refined inferential logic, strengthening Nyaya's theistic defense. Now, what can be the conclusion? Nyaya's 9 proofs integrate causality, order, language, and morality into rational theism. Despite criticisms, Udayan's arguments stand among the most rigorous classical Indian attempts to establish God's existence, comparable with the strongest theistic arguments worldwide. So basically, in conclusion, usually we take negative points as well as positive points also. So even though not perfect, even though number of criticisms are there, still Udayan's argument or Nyaya's argument are one of the strongest as far as Indian philosophy is concerned. And also it compares with the Western philosophers who are more logical, more systematic. It compares with them also. Let us go to 7C. Is the concept of immortality of a soul necessary condition for rebirth? Discuss with reference to Bhagavad Gita. Now, the first part of the question is the concept of immortality of a soul a necessary condition for rebirth? So first you have to answer that, and then discuss with reference to Bhagavad Gita. So this is the second part. Discuss means again directive, whenever directive discuss is there, though not in elaborate critical evaluation is required, but yes, brief critical evaluation, and particularly in 225 or 300 words question is required, and then concluding remarks are also required. The doctrine of rebirth, that is Punarjanma, in Indian thought presupposes an enduring principle beyond the body. The Bhagavad Gita affirms the immortality of soul as its foundation. And in chapter 2, 20th Sloka, it declares na jayate mriyate va kadachit nitya saswato yam. The self is unborn and indestructible. Then again, in 22nd slokas, rebirth is illustrated as vasasmasi jirnani yatha vihaya. Just as old clothes are discarded, the soul takes new body. So basically, these are Sanskrit slokas, part of the slokas. This also can be remembered and quoted if you remember, because this will enhance definitely the quality of the answer. So for Gita, immortality is essential to rebirth, karma, and dharma. The eternal soul carries moral responsibility across lives, making karma phala just and intelligible. This also underpins Krishna's exhortation up to Arjuna in chapter 2. Since Atma is immortal, Arjuna should not grieve but perform his dharma yuddha. So this is the Krishna's, uh, basically teaching to Arjuna. Now, what can be the critical evaluation of this? Sankara saw this as a proof of changeless Atma. In contrast, Buddhists like Nagarjuna and Dharmakirti denied Atma, explaining rebirth though through Pratyut Samutpad. Mimamsaks also, such as Kumaril, accepted transmigration but resisted the Gita's liberation through knowledge. In Western philosophy, Hume doubted a persisting self, though Kant upheld immortality as a moral postulate. So now what can be the conclusion, which will answer basically first part of the question? Unlike Buddhism's rebirth without a self, the Gita makes the immortality of Atma indispensable. Without it, rebirth, karma, and moksha lose coherence. So this is what can be the answer of the first part as well as conclusion of the whole discussion. I will go to last question, part A of question 8. Evaluate the nature and object of religious experience as explained by Radha Krishnan in Hindu view of life. So this question is directly from Radha Krishnan's book. Evaluate the nature and object of religious experience. So here, if you see, the directive is evaluate, which means about 30 to 40% of whole answer should devote to critical evaluation of Radha Krishnan's view uh, of religious experience, nature and object of religious experience, and then conclusion also. As Radha Krishnan presents religion as rooted in experience rather than dogma or ritual. For him, religion is not assent to propositions but a living encounter with the real, comparable to the seer's direct vision of truth. So, this is Radha Krishnan's view on religion. Nature of religious experience, Radha Krishnan highlights its features. So, since a number of features are there, here bullet points have been used. You may use numbering also 1, 2, 3, or you may use ABCD also, because then only it will be clear. And then briefly headings also have been used just to, so that it gets the examiner's attention immediately. So first is immediate and intuitive. So beyond reasoning, it rationally defensible. Second quality is transformative. It purifies the individual and inspires ethical conduct and service, linking religion with dharma in action. Third is universal. All faiths share the same experiential core, though expressed differently. Next is dynamic. An evolving realization, not a static belief, echoing the Upanishadic quest. So, unlike aesthetic or ethical experience, religious experience reaches the ultimate ground of being. Object of religious experience. So, this is the nature. So, now you see the two parts have been asked. If you see the question, one is nature, another is object of religious experience. So, we have to explain both, because we cannot leave one and explain only one. So, nature of religious experience, this is one heading. And before that, a brief introduction, but that also directly related with the question. And then object of religious experience. Now, this is second part. So, its object is absolute, that is Brahm, not a distinct creator, but the spiritual ground of existence. The Atma Brahm identity is realized inwardly. Scriptures and rituals are secondary aids. The essence lies in self-realization and moral transformation. So, this is basically the object of religious experience. What are its implications? This grounds Radhakrishnan's religious pluralism. All religions express one reality in line with Upanishadic statement, Ekam Sat Vipra Bauddha Badanti. Now, definitely we have to evaluate, because already in question itself, if you see the question, the evaluate the nature. So we have to evaluate this. So critical evaluation has to be very, very importantly mentioned. Comparable to William James' phenomenology, Radhakrishnan's view encourages tolerance and interfaith harmony. Yet critics point to Vedantic inclusivism, which risks reducing diversity. Buddhists deny an eternal Brahm. Mimamsaks resist experiential emphasis. Modern philosopher J.L. Mackie and analytic thinkers argue that subjective experience cannot establish metaphysical truths. So this is what their argument. Another Indian philosopher, Sri Aurobindo, went further, seeing experience as a part of the evolutionary unfolding of consciousness, adding a dynamic historical dimension. Now, in conclusion, for Radhakrishnan, dogmas divides, but experience unites. Religious experience is the essence of religion. An immediate realization of the absolute, inspiring ethical action and harmonizing diverse faiths, even if challenged by doctrinal distinctiveness. So this is what Radhakrishnan's view. We'll go to 8th question, part B. Is it necessary for the normative principles to bear reference to God in order to produce a feeling of obligation in a moral agent? Critically discuss. Again, there are two parts in the question. First part is it necessary for the normative principles to bear a reference to God in order to produce a feeling of obligation in a moral order? Whether morality necessarily requires God? This is the meaning of the whole thing. And then this has to be discussed critically. So critical discussion means, again, roughly about 40% have to be devoted to critical evaluation and conclusion. So first we will answer first part. It is not necessary for normative principles. So now this is very, very categorically it has been answered. It is not necessary for normative principles to bear reference to God in order to create a sense of obligation. Though theistic traditions often claim so. In divine command theory, for example, St. Augustine's and William Ockham, actions are binding because they are willed by God, disobedience being sin. This gives morality absolute authority but risks arbitrariness. Another view, Plato's Euthyphro dilemma, highlights this tension. If God is only what God commands, if good is only what God commands, morality is arbitrary. If God commands what is already good, obligation is independent of God. So this is a dilemma. Very nice way it has been mentioned why morality is, when God is not required for morality. Immanuel Kant, another philosopher, too rejected divine command as the source of duty. For him, obligation arises from the categorical imperative, rooted in rational autonomy. God is a postulate of practical reason, ensuring the union of virtue and happiness, but not the ground of moral law. Non-theistic tradition. Now, there are a number of non-theistic traditions where God is not there. Affirm this independence. Buddhism, for example, grounds ethics in compassion and pratyut samutpat. Charvaks in prudence and social utility. Similarly, Aristotle, in Western philosophy, if you see Aristotle's virtue ethics and Mill's utilitarianism, rely on flourishing and welfare. Modern thinkers like John Rawls derive obligation from fairness and human rights network framework, showing how conscience and empathy themselves generate binding moral force. So, by and large, philosophers, what they have said, that God is a not necessary ingredient for morality. So, conclusion, while divine reference may deepen motivation or for believers, moral obligation rests on reason, conscience, and human solidarity, making ethics autonomous and universally binding. So this is a good question basically, but then it has to be written or expressed in a very nice manner. And it can be, it will fetch quite good marks also if written nicely. Now let us go to 8th question, part C, which is the last part of this paper and this section. Discuss the Advaitic notion of indiscernibility, that is indescribability, that is anirvachaniyata in the context of nature of religious language. Now, if you see from Advaita Vedanta, two big questions have come in a way in philosophy of religion chapter. So this paper, I mean, this section, philosophy of religion in this year, that 2025, have derived a number of questions from Western philosophy and from Indian philosophy. And if you have studied Western and Indian philosophy well, you will be able to answer these questions quite nicely. So now this question directly discuss. So Advait Vedanta's anirvachaniyata we have to discuss in context of nature of religious language. And discuss again requires that briefly you critically evaluate, also not in detail, but definitely 10 to 20% word limits you have to devote to critical evaluation and also to the conclusion. Okay, the problem of religious language arises from the gap between finite words and transcendent reality. Can the divine be literally described or only indicated symbolically? Traditions distinguish cataphatic, that is positive, or apophatic, that is negative discourse. Within this debate, Advait Vedanta advances another concept of anirvachaniyata, that is indescribability. For Sankara, the phenomenal world projected by Maya is neither Sat nor Asat, but indefinable. Hence, Brahm as non-dual absolute cannot be described by affirmation or denial. Since words operate by distinctions, direct denotation fails. Instead, scriptures employ indirect indications, that is Lakshana. For example, Tatutvam Asi. Towards Brahm, Neti Neti, another, is only a method, while Anirvachaniyata names the ontological ground for the failure of language. So, because language cannot describe, so therefore it becomes indefinable or indescribable, and therefore anirvachaniyata becomes the important theory of anirvachaniyata given by Advaita Vedanta becomes very important. Now, what can be the critical evaluation? The doctrine safeguards transcendence, echoing Wittgenstein's dictum and Hicks' view of doctrines as symbolic, pointers to the real. Janet Soskis likewise defends metaphor as meaningful, yet the critics like Nyaya logicians call neither real nor real illogical. So this is what Nyaya philosophers say. And Ramanuja also holds Brahma describable. So Ramanuja says Brahma can be described and it's not indescribable. Through Kalyana Gunas, another section of the philosophy Mimamsaks further argue that the Veda is self-valid and does not require ineffability. Modern critics like Iyer and Flew dismiss ineffable claims as cognitively empty. So, quite strong criticism against this theory. Now, at the conclusion, thus Advait's Anirvachaniyata redefines religious language as indicative, symbolic, and transformative, not a mirror of Brahma, but a ladder pointing beyond words to realization. Now, this basically completes the today's description, or the we have discussed the part B or section B of the paper 2. I hope that this is useful. Now, with this, I have already discussed the whole of the question papers of this year's paper 1 and paper 2. Now, in next classes, we will try to again restart with some orientation class kind of thing for next year's, that is 2026 exam. I hope that these classes or these descriptions are useful to the students. Thank you for participating and viewing this video. Thank you.